Hello, my name is Jacob Totson, and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. For the last couple of weeks, I've been living in Trondheim, Norway. What I've been doing here is a lot of research on a very complicated and really interesting subject. However, it's taking a little bit longer than I expected to actually get that video out. And so for myself and for you, what I thought we would do today is break things up a little bit and just have a little bit of a discussion. This subject I want to talk about is something I've been reflecting on while being here in Norway, because I've been calling myself a Norse Pagan for a very long time. In fact, any of the people who've been watching this channel for a few years now know that I used to start my videos like this. Hello, my name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan. My name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan. My name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan. And so this transition of not saying this anymore really began when I started traveling. That's just because I wanted to have this new image for the channel of being this traveling YouTuber that goes to ancient sites and records and talks about them. So I wanted to talk to more of a general audience with that. But I still consider myself a Norse pagan in the sense that I worship the Norse deities and I follow the Norse cosmology when I think about the greater spirit world. But what I want to talk about today is this terminology that we're using in this modern era, because it didn't exist in the ancient past. And yet it's something that we're in so much need of in this modern time because we are so spread out. And so what we're going to do is walk up this beautiful trail, show you the beautiful views, and discuss this topic of Norse paganism and paganism as a whole, and whether or not this is a good term and something we should be using, and to what extent, and then just all those things around it. So lots to talk about, lots to discuss, and this is a discussion, so please hop down below. This is my opinion, this is not truth, this is not law. So I want to hear your opinions down below throughout the course of this video, and let's just have a good, respectful discussion about this subject. So to start off this conversation, why did I bring it up in the first place? Like, what's made me think about it? Well, one, definitely being here, saying that I was a Norse pagan for the longest time, never having been to a Scandinavian country, and now I've been to them. I've been to Norway, I've been to Sweden, I've been to Denmark. And so I really kind of want to reflect, and I have been reflecting on what it means to be a Norse pagan as coming from the United States and saying this. But also this term pagan has been something that's come under scrutiny, and a lot of the times in the comments of my videos. And so what I did is I created a poll a few months ago and I got everyone's thoughts. And so I'll put that up for you here. And in that poll, 79% of people agree that pagan is a perfectly fine term to use when talking about Norse paganism today. And it seems like many people identify with that as well. And of course, some people agree this shouldn't be used at all. And then some people didn't have an opinion at all. Now, when reading through the comments of this poll, the main consensus of why people don't like the term pagan today is because it was used as a negative thing in the past. And so to understand that, we need to understand the history of conversion and the history of pagan interactions in the past. And I use the term pagan here because it's the easiest one to use. So let's go on a little brain journey though. Let's travel back in time to when people lived in this valley and worshiped the Norse gods. If you lived in this valley 2,000 years ago and you worshipped Odin, or a version of Odin or a version of Thor, you would not have an identity for your religious practice, your spiritual practice, because it wasn't needed, because you didn't need to identify it. It's just what you grew up with. You were born in this valley and you more than likely died in this valley. And so you would have just gone your whole life going to the local temple or sacred grove or priest, worshiping Thor, worshiping Odin, and you would have never needed to label yourself because you only interacted with your community. And the very few rare occasions where you didn't interact with your community, it rarely probably was like this religious thing. It was more than likely they came here from a tribe nearby. They came here from across the fjord for a general assembly, and they would have had very similar practices. Now, this is where we see local deities definitely come up in popularity, especially in the Celtic world, and I would argue up into the Norse world as well. We just don't know the local deities here as much, but essentially every tribe usually had a unique deity to themselves. If you were a horse tribe and you raised horses, especially in the Celtic world, perhaps you worshipped a deity like Epona, and then someone up in Scotland or Ireland doesn't even know who Epona is because they don't work with Epona, or because they haven't had the culture and history to create this deity of Epona or to recognize her. And the same deal if you lived here in Trondheim Fjord and you had seafaring gods, and those would have been more prominent because you relied on the sea for travel and transport. And so you would have worshipped the sea gods more. whereas someone in the interior of Norway would have worshipped the fertility gods more, the hunting gods more. And so you would have had slight variations in the reason, but not enough to say that's a completely different religion. Fast forward into the Viking Age, the Iron Age, you would have had more interactions, particularly with Christianity, and especially as the Viking world expanded. I mean, we know the Viking raiders went all the way down, and the traders went all the way down into the Muslim world. We know that a Buddha statue was found, I believe, in Sweden. And so the Viking people, the Iron Age people, definitely were interacting with other religions. And it wasn't until this point that these religions would have had to be identified. And so when the Christians arrived and they say, who are your gods? You know, they wouldn't never had to identify who, you know, I don't know, I worship Odin. And they're like, oh, that's wrong. You should worship God. This is a different religion that you need to follow. And so it is, in my opinion, that it wasn't until the arrival of Christianity that people really had to start questioning what they called their religion. And it isn't really until Christianity came into play that you started seeing things such as the Mjolnir show up, simply because it was a way to identify, much like the Christian cross. You started seeing the creation of crosses and Mjolnirs in the same mold. And so traders were making both of them. And so you started seeing the mass production of them simply as a way as identifying religions, because there was not an instant conversion over into Christianity. It was a timed process where people, you know, over generations would slowly convert until they were forcibly converted later into and towards the end of the Viking Age, when the kings began to convert to Christianity and then began to enforce this power onto other people. And in general, within history of conversion in the European continent, you have this period of people in the cities were the first to convert to Christianity because these were the centers of worship and veneration for Christianity. And then they had missionaries go out into the countryside. And so particularly in the countryside, the pagan practices remained. And that's why with the term pagan, we just see it mean common folk, the common religion, someone who follows the country ways, which, you know, I'll put up the literal translation here, but that's essentially what it means. And then with heathen, this is interesting because I believe that the origins are Germanic versus Latin. Heathen means simply one who exists in the heath. And what a heath is a wild open space. And so essentially people who live in the countryside, the people who live away from cities, are the ones who are heathens. It isn't until much later, until around the 1400s or 1500s, that we see another aggressive push for Christianity to spread. You have the soft conversion when they started interacting. You had the aggressive conversion when the kings began to be Christianized and they began to persecute those who were not Christian. And then you kind of had this lull period where people in the countryside were kind of left to themselves. And then over the course of time, this eventually changed and the countryside was more forcibly converted. And of course, the witches were persecuted and the people who still followed these old ways. And it's after this that it kind of died and went into hiding for a while until we get to the more modern era when it's become more popular in the world and safer to do so. So of course a lot of these traditions survived. That's why we have a lot of things such as midsummer, Yule, or just various healing wells and little traditional things that people still did across the countryside that weren't completely washed out. And of course that's something that actually here in Trondheim, that's my main topic for the big video I'll be filming when I'm in the process of filming, is the conversion of Trondheim and how much was buried and covered up and how important Trondheim actually was in the ancient past. So I guess my argument is that these terms as negative terms, as far as like pagan or heathen as a negative thing, it hasn't been like a negative thing for a while. Yeah, so okay, back in the 1300s, 1400s, the time of conversion, at least the first bit, you know, yes, maybe it was used as a derogatory term, as a negative term for someone who practiced the old religions. Finishing up history, 1800s is where we see more interest in this. Is mostly because global literacy was starting to go up, at least in the upper class. And we see more and more people start getting interested in mythologies, particularly the Greek and Roman mythologies. And so we see a lot of the revival architecture come up from this as well. A lot of temples are built, maybe to honor the beauty of the world more so than to honor like ancient deities, but it's still there. And we see that a little bit with the Germanic movements as well, at least until the corruption of the first part of the 1900s. But regardless, after World War II and into the 50s and 60s, this is where we see Wicca become popular and kind of show up. This is where we see the hippie movements, a lot of the New Age spirituality. This is when we see yoga come in. And so essentially we have all these globalist elements. So we have all these things like people learning yoga in the United States for the first time. People having access to, again, literacy going up. The global population is going up. Global literacy is growing up. Education is going up. And so we're seeing all these things, and people start to get educated around the world, particularly in the West, in the United States and in Europe. And so I think we start seeing more and more interest in global spirituality and not just the church. And so I don't know, I don't have the information for you to tell you when the term pagan started becoming more widespread. But my guess is it was around the 60s and 70s. This is also where we see the term Asatru come up, even in Europe, in the United States. In fact, it's the term that's still used in Norway now. I was talking to someone of the locals, and they said Asatru before me. And they said, yeah, a local Asatru, or the Asatru of the past. And so it's interesting that this term, at least from this one account of me talking to someone, was used very casually to mention the religion of the past, even though this term did not exist in the past. This was not Asatru was not a term, at least far as we know, that was used by the ancient Scandinavian people. And I think, as far as I know as well, this is also used in, of course, Iceland, and then Sweden as well. It's the main term used. But then in the United States, Asatru became very political on both sides, and I think a lot of people became uninterested in it because of this. That's one of the reasons I don't like the term Asatru, is I don't like what comes with that, with the heavy politics on both sides. And so I think that's one of the reasons I went with Norse paganism, is it felt undogmatic, and maybe that's why I liked it, is it felt like it could be my own thing. It didn't have to have like this, structure, church-like structure. I mean, again, that's one of the things I never liked about Asatru, is it seemed like it was more dogmatic and it was more church-based. Paganism became popular, heathen became popular in the 1900s. And so now here we are in this modern era. And I did a search on Google, like Google Analytics. And when you look into it, the most popular terms for these modern reconstructed ancient religions is pagan. And that's ultimately why I think it's going to be continued to be used, is because it's just how we find each other. It's how we share information, as we use this broad umbrella term that is pagan. And then if you want to specify what kind of pagan you are, what kind of deities you venerate and worship, that's when you use Norse pagan or Celtic pagan. I know the Greeks, they don't say Greek pagan, they say Hellenistic polytheist. And so regardless, terms are a big thing in the world right now. Everyone wants to figure out what terms we are. I know I'm not big on terms. Maybe that's the hipster deep down. I'm like, man, I don't like labels. Don't label what I do, man. Like, I don't know, the world's become very label obsessed. And I think pagan is kind of wrapped into that as well. I don't think it really needs a label, but we have to, because we don't live in small local communities anymore, at least not commonly, that all worship very similar pagan concepts, indigenous, global concepts, to Europe or to North America or wherever. And so we have to use this to find one another. It's how you found this video. It's how people find my channel. It's how I've made a platform, is by using this term pagan, because it's how we share information. But personally, if I didn't have to, I would never use it. And I'll tell you why. Because to me, it doesn't need a label. To me, it's this. To me, it's this mossy forest that's just so beautiful. And experiencing this and feeling it, something that I was told very recently, and it's something that I've been sharing with everyone. I love it. I'll share it here as well, is you don't believe in the Norse gods. You don't believe in paganism. You experience it. And that's what I do when I'm out here right now filming this video, is there's this beautiful stream next to me, green mossy hills and a beautiful tall forest, and I'm experiencing that, and I'm thankful and grateful for that moment. And so that doesn't need a label. I don't need to call this anything. And I think that is more common here in Europe, more common as it survived in the small tribes and communities, is it didn't need a label, it didn't need to have a dogma, it just needed to be experienced. So I think this view will do just nicely for the end of this video. Don't worry so much about the terminology. Don't worry so much about the label. It's really not that important. I think it's a great way to find others, but worry more about just the experience of living and seeing the world in this pagan lens, the spiritual lens, animistic lens, maybe, polytheist lens. That's what I've learned in my time here in Europe. And so I hope this benefits everyone. I hope this conversation's been good. Let me know down below what your thoughts are. And yeah, I'll leave you with this beautiful view. And until the next one, and until the next adventure here in Europe and my time abroad, Thank you, and summer's blessings to you.